Hey everybody, this is Dream, and before I get started in the video, I just want to shout out the new Patreon members, Gerald P, Patrick B, and Andrews B. Hope I'm getting all of your guys' names correctly. I really appreciate it, and if you want to join Patreon, you can check in the link description below. Also, if you don't mind hitting the subscribe button and liking this video once you finish it, that would be awesome. With that said, let's go and get into the slate. We have a little 6-game slate here on Fanduel today. This slate does look pretty good, actually, despite the fact that it's relatively small. But it's going to have a little, it's going to be a little bit harder to get real good value guys and stuff like that. But we found some good ones for you, so we'll get those to you. So let's go ahead and start with the pitchers first. Actually, I'm going to start with the teams that are kind of stackable today. We have the Minnesota Twins, the Houston Astros, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the San Diego Padres. They are just going up against some really not great pitching, and I think all four of those teams are going to be teams that you have to consider looking at stacks. So for the pitchers I do like, first of all, we have Lance McCullers for Houston. Now, he's going up against Oakland, which is the best matchup on the board here, and he's done pretty good this season. He's only had a handful of games, as you can see. He's had 5. He's only had, his worst game was 21 points against Baltimore and 24 points against Atlanta. He's already had a game against Oakland where he scored 43 points, and he's had a couple good games against the LA Angels, who aren't the greatest team either. And his strikeouts have been okay in all but the one game against Baltimore, so I do think that he has 25 to 35 point upside in this particular matchup, just because, well, Oakland, they have a couple really good hitters, but that's about it. So he has a pretty good shot at having a good game here. And again, he's already had a good game against Oakland, so he's probably one of the best options on the board. Nobody on this particular slate is a real big strikeout guy, so getting a guy that can get you 5 or 6 strikeouts today is going to help, bolster the fantasy points overall. I don't know that anybody is really going to hit 45 plus, but if anybody can, McCullers is probably the one guy that might. The next guy that we're going to talk about is McCullers for St. Louis. He's got about 35 point upside here against Cincinnati. However, he is a little bit risky because he's played Cincinnati 3 times this season, and twice they were under 10 fantasy points. Now, I will add the fact that both those games were at Cincinnati, so he does have some upside because this game is away, and he did good against Cincinnati at home the first time, where but overall, he's a little bit risky because of that, and Cincinnati has been playing better, and they've got some decent hitters. He's still probably the second best pitcher on the slate, however. The third guy that I think is interesting is Carlos Carrasco from the Mets against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, obviously, the Pittsburgh Pirates are not very good this season, and he's a decent pitcher. He's not quite as good as the other two guys, and he's been very boomer bust. So you can look at his games here. You have some games where he gets in the 50s, and then other games where he's sub 20 and even sub 10. And so he's just extremely boomer bust. It's really hard to gauge how he's going to do. He has some games where he gets 6 or 7 innings in, and then some other games where he gets to 2. It's just, he's very boomer bust, so he's pretty risky from that perspective. If he was that risky, I would want him to be a little bit less expensive before I thought to using him. But overall, he's still somebody you have to consider based on the matchups that are available today on this slate. And then I have one more guy that you got to consider, and that is Noah Syndergaard. And it's simply because he's going up against the Miami Marlins. And while he has been inconsistent this season, he actually has a pretty stable situation against Miami. He's done pretty good against them in the past and this season, in fact. He had one game here against 28 fantasy points and another with 33. And he has a little bit of... He's been struggling on the strikeout aspect, but, you just want decent pitchers against, bad teams, and this kind of fits that description. Obviously, it's not the best option, but he's still in the position that you have to consider him, at least on this particular slate, just because it's such a limited slate when it comes to pitching. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the batters themselves. We have a lot of good options at each position, so I'll go ahead and get into that. So at catcher and first base, I have about 5 guys to look at. The first guy is Paul Goldschmidt. I actually meant to change this here. Hang on. It's just the last 10 games because we want to see how they've been doing lately. So he's averaging 10 fantasy points a game, and he's been hitting, he's had some games where he's off, but he's still hitting okay, and I think that he's probably due for a home run, and that's one of the reasons I like him in this particular matchup against Cincinnati, who's just not got a very good pitcher pitching. The next guy is Pete Alonso. He actually has hit a home run 2 in the last 3 games, And he's been hitting the ball really well as of late. He's getting hits in almost every game, as you can see. And so he's definitely somebody you want to take a look at. Plus, he's a lot less expensive than Goldschmidt, and he's been doing a little bit better. Then I have Christian Walker for Arizona. Now, he's been a little bit hit and miss the last few games, but he still has tremendous upside. He has home run upside, and he's got a really nice matchup here in this particular game against Manaea, who has just been completely awful this season. And then Josh Bell is a guy that I think you have to consider. Where is he? Again, for San Diego, they just look like they have this is a really plus matchup for them. They're facing a new pitcher that hasn't actually pitched in the majors yet, and so I think that they're going to have some opportunity to really get to this guy. He was not good in the minors at all either, so San Diego is some team that you have to take a look at in this particular setup because the pitcher was so bad in the minors even. And then the last but not least is Jose Miranda. He's been pretty solid the last 10 games with 11.1 fantasy points a game. He's not always a big home run hitter, but he's still getting lots of base hits and stuff, and he's getting the RBIs, and that's what you like to see in those particular games. And so even, he's been a little bit almost, a flash. He has a big game and then has some small games where he gets 1 or 2 hits, but he's getting points in every game, which not everybody here is doing. So, and he's got a nice big old plus matchup. At second base, I have Jose Altuve for Houston. He's been just playing pretty good lately. I really like him in this particular matchup and against Oakland, against Kaprielian or whatever. He's just a really good pitcher to go get guys up against, and that's why I think Houston's a great team to look at today. Obviously, he's a little bit expensive, and depending on which pitcher you use, he may be a little bit hard to roster. But overall, he's somebody you have to consider at this position. Another guy I really like, and probably one of my favorite guys on the slate, is Jake Cronenworth. Now, he's had a lot of really good games lately, but he's had a couple in the middle that are kind of off. But overall, I think he's a pretty safe option today against the new rookie pitcher for the Diamondbacks. Then Luis Arraez. Now, he might not be playing, but, he's still in the line because of how good he's been playing lately. And so I think he's somebody you have to take a look at if he does play. However, he isn't the biggest home run threat, so you do have to, think about that as well. The next guy that I like is Jeff McNeil for the Mets. They've been kind of struggling lately, and he's getting some hits, but he does need to, get hits in order to help them win. And he's one of the, guys that has some serious upside when he has a good game. Obviously, he hasn't been perfect lately, but he's somebody you can take a look at. Then Michael Massey for Kansas City. He just looks at he's like in a good position. He's been playing pretty well for them. The Kansas City Royals are not a very good team, but he's been getting hits in most of the games and scoring, 7 and 10 fantasy points in a lot of these. And so if you just need to save money, he's somebody you can save money to. One of my other options here are the two St. Louis players that can be at second base or shortstop, Tommy Edman and also Brendan Donovan. Both of them have been playing pretty well as of late. Edman's been just absolutely tearing it up, and I really like him in this particular matchup against the Cincinnati Reds. Even though it's not at Cincinnati, it's still a nice plus matchup, and I'll show you Brendan Donovan as well. Let's see, here we go. He hasn't been quite as good, but he's still having some good games, and he can hit a home run occasionally. At third base, I have Manny Machado first. Now, Manny is pretty expensive, obviously, as you can guess, but I think he's in a really good spot here against the rookie pitcher, and he's always a home run threat when he comes out. He hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well as we want, but he's still doing pretty good, and he's a very plus matchup. Bobby Witt Jr. against Dylan Bundy is definitely somebody that sounds interesting to me in this setup, and he's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. I really like how he's playing, and I think that he's a very nice plus matchup here. And he's a lot less expensive than Machado as well. Then we have Jose Miranda, who I already mentioned, and then Nolan Arenado for the St. Louis Cardinals. He actually hit a home run yesterday, as you can see here, and he's just having some really big games as of late. He's had a couple off ones, but he's in a great position against Cincinnati, and so I really like him. And then finally, Alex Bregman for Houston. He was going through a bit of a rough patch for a little while, but it looks like he's kind of broken out of it. He's starting to get some hits and stuff, And so I look for him to continue that and try to, hopefully get a home run in this particular matchup against Oakland in a very plus matchup for Houston. At shortstop, we have Carlos Correa. Now he's been a little bit hit and miss lately, but he hit a home run 2 games ago, and then he had a couple games beforehand where he hit more. He's very kind of boomer bust in this way, but I still think he's in a great situation and somebody you have to take a look at. I already looked at Bobby Witt. Francisco Lindor, somebody I think is interesting in this particular matchup for the Mets. He's been extremely boomer bust lately, but if they're going to win games, then he has to be hitting well. O'Neill Cruz for the Pittsburgh. Now, obviously, he's going up against Carlos Correa, which is a little bit tough, but he's been having some really big games where he just scores a massive amount of points. He hits the ball really hard, and that does tend to lead to, hard contact is a good indicator of getting fantasy points. The problem with him a lot of times is he's not got a great batting average, and he tends to strike out and stuff like that. So you do have to be aware of that, but I still think he's a guy that could potentially hit a home run. Jeremy Pena is finally broken out of his slump, and I'm glad because he was kind of stinking for a little bit, but he's now doing pretty good, and I like him in this particular matchup against Oakland. And then, obviously, Tommy Edman and Brendan Donovan, who I already mentioned, could also be in this position if you like. In the outfielders, we have Jordan Alvarez for Houston and Kyle Tucker. Now, Alvarez may or may not play, so we'll have to see, but he has had some really massive games lately, and so I think that he's somebody you have to look at. And then also Tucker, who I mentioned against Oakland. He's a little bit less expensive, and he's actually probably got more upside because he's just absolutely crushing balls lately. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 home runs the last 7 or 8 games, so we really like what he's doing. And then we got some little bit less expensive guys, and Stone Garrett, for Arizona. If he plays, he's probably my favorite option at when it comes to the rookies of Arizona. I tend to like him better than their other rookie, but both of them have been good, but they don't ever usually play the same game. And in this particular game, he's going to have the big advantage with the bat against pitcher, and so you have to consider him in your lineup. Same with Bryce Harper. He's just in a good matchup here against Pablo Lopez. He's actually done pretty well against him in the past, so I think he's somebody you got to take a look at. And then let's see here, Kyle Schwarber for Philadelphia also is somebody to consider in the Philadelphia game against Lopez. He hasn't been as good, but he still has home run potential, and he kind of went into a slump for a little bit while, but he feels like he's starting to get some hits again, so I like him. And then Jerickson Profar for the Padres. He's been very boomer bust, but I think he has some potential in this particular game. Kind of the Padres had a bit of a rough spot for a little bit, but they get a nice little bonus matchup here against a rookie pitcher. 2 more guys. Tyler O'Neill for St. Louis. He's pretty inexpensive here on Fanduel too, which really helps. And he's been hitting the ball pretty well, and they have a nice little matchup today against Cincinnati. And then finally, Brandon Nimmo. Oh, I actually have 2 more. I'm sorry. Brandon Nimmo for the Mets here. Now he had a couple games that he hadn't been good, but he's had some really good games in a row for a while. He's also the leadoff typically, and I really like him in these matchups. Finally, last but not least, Will Myers. Where is he? Oh, Will Myers. Here we go. For San Diego. I usually don't like to use him on FanDuel so much because he's not a big home run threat, but he has been scoring points, and he's been getting a couple hits every game, and so I think he's in a good position right now while he's kind of heating up a little bit as a hitter. And so I like guys that are doing really well as hitters. Obviously, not as ideal on FanDuel because home runs are so important here, but he's been scoring enough points that makes him worthwhile, especially at his price point. So with that said, we got a pretty good slate here. As you can see, the pitcher is a little bit tough, but overall, even if you use McCullers, you still can afford almost $3,200 a player, which is going to help you. You're going to be able to mix in some of the cheaper guys and build yourself a pretty decent lineup. So with that said, I appreciate you guys again. Thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day.